Hey there, I'm Zach Abramowitz, and I am Legally Disrupted. In episode 34 of Zach Abramowitz is Legally Disrupted, we are headed out to the desert. I recorded this episode at the NetDocuments user conference in beautiful Arizona at the JW Marriott. Great times were had by all. While I was there, I had an opportunity to catch up with my good friend, Dan Hauck. He's the chief product officer of NetDocuments. I was covering Dan back when he was building ThreadKM, which he sold to NetDocuments, and that's where he's been ever since. And we had an opportunity to talk about the evolving role of legacy software, of document management. How are those going to play a key role in a world of AI? Got to see some of the company's takes on AI, what's working, what's not. And we discussed whether or not the document management system is going to improve in an age of AI and become a little bit more than just a place where you store your documents, but like a true repository for knowledge management, a kind of data source for AI. I'm not sure, what that role is going to be moving forward, but it was interesting to get Dan's take on it and hear their perspective. So if AI and document management is your kind of legal, geeky, nerdy thing, let's get disrupted.
This is what number Inspire conference for you in the US?
This would be number 8.
This is number 8. Okay. How does this one feel different to you than previous conferences?
I think one of the unique things about Inspire is that it's a chance to connect with our customers and show them in person, live, a lot of the things that we're developing together and get their reactions, get their feedback. That's always part of Inspire. I think what is maybe different about this one is 2 things. First, it's the AI piece of it, which is obviously very important, but that's been in the fabric for the past couple of years. What we're hearing now from customers is, we've had some of our AI products like our assistant in market now for over a year. And there have been implementation and adoption and training programs that have been put in place. And so now we're having customers come to us and tell us what they've been doing, how they've been using these tools, how it's really changing the way that they're working in many regards. And we have real feedback from those customers where they're doing surveys about how much things are like, for instance, our assistant is being utilized. We had a firm share the impact that it's having in some of the practice groups that they're working in. And so I think it's seeing this kind of transformational tech of AI, not just as a science project, but as something that they are figuring out how to adopt and helping us inform that next iteration of the product.
Yeah, and maybe this is just me, and because there's sort of a recency bias to this, but I feel like there is a more engaged audience than I'm even used to seeing at Inspire conferences. And the way I judge that is I was on a panel yesterday at 4:30 to 5:30. And that is typically the time where you are in between, folks and the bar and socializing and seeing their peers and colleagues. And the room was packed. And I didn't see a lot of people leaving. Now, maybe that's just because we were the best panel ever, but I think actually I've sensed that as well here. It's a little bit palpable, like people are really engaged at the moment. And this isn't, like you said, like a science project anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was a great panel. We had we had Zach Warren, we had Nikki Shaver, and then Jen Poon from NetDocuments. So it was absolutely, I think, a great panel. And, what was great about it was that you were hitting on kind of the practical applications. And that's really been the theme here, is how we're bringing AI to start to have scaled use cases where you're able to put something in to a customer's repository that has transformational capability. We demonstrated AI profiling here at NetDocuments, where essentially you can add automated profiling so that every document that you put in, not 1, not 10, not 1,000, but every document, hundreds of millions of documents can now be profiled with AI profiling. So the moment someone saves it, you can classify it. You can fill out rich metadata around it based upon, hey, this is a contract. Here's the type of contract it is. Here are the different elements inside of that contract, pieces of metadata, execution date, terms of the agreement, et cetera. But if it's a litigation document, it can be something else. And so what we're seeing is we're able to really directly address things that from a document management perspective have always been kind of holy grail type of needs of being able to accurately and consistently understand what is in your documents. And so to be able to show that, again, not just as, this is where we're going and this is, how it's going to work, but this is in the world. And we have customers who are doing this right now at scale across millions of documents. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think in general in the industry right now, like we're starting to see a little bit more of that, where it's not anymore talking about the future, but as I call it, like either talking about like the not too distant future or literally the present right now.
Sure.
Can you explain on the issue of scale, right? Because it's one thing, even last year, NetDocuments was talking about, the ability to like tag documents automatically, which I thought was a really interesting use case because for a few reasons. Number one, it improves the NetDocuments core product, meaning it wasn't like a sort of side AI, kind of chat bot that like is built in. So now like we can say, oh, we've got some AI in there. Like it was very targeted and focused to say, here's like something that we've always wanted within document management. We think that AI can make that better. So I thought that was really interesting, even then. But talk about like the difference in scale and like the number of documents that can do that to now, and like what that means from like a technical perspective, being able to accomplish that, but then also like the use cases that it begins to unlock.
Yeah, absolutely. So last year when we were talking about some of these things, it really was more in kind of targeted use cases and targeted environments. Oftentimes, as part of a matter project, like doing a due diligence review or something like that, we were constructing apps to be able to do this. But now, over the past year, we've been developing, our technologies so that we can apply this as part of an ingestion pipeline, so that you can actually do it to every document. And I think part of that we've learned a lot along the way in terms of doing that. The first is that customers really want to be able to have a strong taxonomy that they can trust has a lot of the document classifications, the data points that they want. They don't want to have to figure that out themselves. They are looking to NetDocuments, and we're helping support them by providing an out-of-the-box taxonomy that they can just quickly ingest into NetDocuments as part of our solution. And what it has is we actually worked with leading experts who've been working in knowledge management for a very long time at firms you probably know very well, and part of that process, we also mapped to well-known solutions like Sally and Folio, and took learnings from those as well. And so we baked that into a pre-built taxonomy that drives now this classification. And so suddenly a lot of the challenges that many customers might have faced of, can I do this across all of our documents? Yes, we built a pipeline to do that. Do I need to, go to every single practice group and ask what kind of documents they work on and what pieces of data they have to get? No, you can use a very well curated taxonomy. And then I think the last piece that came into play was the development of some of these newer models that are very effective. They're very lightweight. They're very cost effective as well. Things like GPT-5 Nano and GPT-4.1 Mini, which can provide a lot of these classifications at scale. I mean, we're able to do this across tens of thousands of documents in a matter of minutes. And so when you're scaling to millions of documents, this becomes a very achievable project, no matter what size repository that you have.
Right. So from this kind of like the why now perspective and answering on the technical side, can you explain that for people who may not be familiar with smaller models?
Sure.
And some of the advantages of them? You mentioned cost, obviously, because every time there's those token usages and compute, those can rack up. Explain what makes the smaller models really ideal for this use case.
Yeah, I think as we've seen some of the more advanced models that have come out recently, they are token consumptive. They do They can do deep thinking. They can iterate multiple times through their own responses in order to make sure that it's matching with what the user is wanting. But when you're talking about a classification scenario, it's a much more straightforward analysis where you have a list of document types, for instance, from a taxonomy. You have a document and you say, which one is the best match for this? And that's a place where small models can be very effective. And then once you've identified what that correct match is, you have those data points that you can then go through the document and say, these are the extractions we want to make here. If this was a pleading, what court was it filed in? Who's the judge? Who are the parties? Those type of pieces of information. And these smaller models are incredibly accurate at being able to do that, much better than what we saw from kind of prior machine learning type of solutions that were very brittle, required a lot of training, a lot of like sample documents to get through. These small models are able to get to better answers faster.
Yeah, and machine learning kind of required you to brute force it.
That's right.
Whereas, an AI model, you can sort of teach it conceptually. It's not like I have to show you, 10,000 contracts until okay, that's a contract, right?
Right.
Let me teach you about like essentially what is a contract at its core.
And I think one of the nice things has been, because of the flexibility of our solution, we've been able to essentially add a workflow so that if you have unique capabilities, or your firm works in a practice area and you deal with a specific kind of document and you want to extract certain things from it that maybe don't come in that pre-baked taxonomy that I talked about, you can actually customize this to be able to address those. And in some cases, you might find that you want a more high-powered model to hit those, subset of documents in order to address really more complex questions. So, we work with customers. We've got a great professional services team that helps do that. And, what we find is that customers are doing really interesting things as they are building out these document ingestion pipelines. We think about, they want to summarize documents in a certain way and save that alongside the metadata of the document. They want to classify it, whether or not it has PII or not, or PHI, so that they can apply the right security policies and things like that. Or they might have, certain retention policies that are unique to them that they want to be able to apply in this ingestion pipeline. So it's really designed to be able to adapt to the workflow that the law firm has or that the organization has. And it's been exciting to see how they've been able to customize it. But again, for those who just are looking for that out of the box thing, which we hear a lot of at Inspire here, we've been able to provide a solution to do that.
So one of the things that's interesting is again, because I, spent some time practicing as did you, and my experience, working with a document management system was typically to be able to find precedent documents. And that would be the real reason that you'd be looking, to tag and classify documents and sort of know what's in there is, okay, I want to now do the same sort of workflow over again. What have we done in the past that's similar? And there is a kind of, a real practice of law perspective, but we didn't think, and I never used a document management system as an example in order to review documents, or I never thought about a document management system as perhaps a tool that would be, for, massive contract repapering or an M&A due diligence. I never thought about the document management system as potentially being useful to do discovery. But as you begin to get into this point where you're able to classify, tag, and know more about what's in your documents, it's not a far jump then to go to that next place where you start unlocking use cases inside of a DMS that you might have thought once upon a time I need a different tool in order to do. Am I seeing that right? And if so, how are you getting users to know, hey, by the way, there's some use cases and that we just didn't ever offer in the DMS because that never would have been possible before, but now it's actually very effective and efficient to do that right where you're doing a whole lot of your other, practice of law work.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the interesting things about being here at Inspire is that we have customers who are coming to us and saying, hey, we want to go back to our lawyers and show them some of the things that you're showing here, because they're doing some of these things and they're having to take documents out of NetDocuments in order to be able to, mark them up or do other kinds of now AI-driven workflow. But, as this technology we're able to put into the platform, we're now able to drive some of that. So and I think you hit on a couple of interesting ones, and you can kind of see how they all start to come together when you have all of the content inside NetDocuments. So as an example, contract repapering, if you have properly classified all of these documents, first of all, you're going to be able to find them quickly, right? You're going to be able to say, yes, this is the universe of documents that I'm going to need to repaper because I've extracted out this set of information. But one of the other things that we've shown here is our new editing tool. So this is a tool available through our assistant, which essentially allows you to mark up documents by just giving our assistant instructions as to what you want marked up. And it can review not just a single clause, but it can go through the entire document and make suggestions. And just like a associate giving you a red line, you can then go through it and accept those suggestions or modify them. But I think the way that we approached it was a little bit different, because what we did was we actually didn't do it just in the Word add-in. Actually, all of the operation is happening under the hood in the XML of the document. So that's what kind of comes forward into Word. And what that means, though, is that
meaning the application is like at the NetDocument, at the document level, not at the Microsoft Word editor level.
That's exactly right. And the beauty of that is that you don't have to be in Microsoft Word in order to be able to make those edits, in order to be able to have the assistant utilize the editing tool. We're able to essentially edit all that on the back end. And what that means is you can look at those 100 documents that you want to be able to repaper and say, make all of these edits across these documents, and it can iterate through all of those. And without ever having to open up Microsoft Word 100 times, you're going to have newly versioned, edited documents according to your instructions. And so it's bringing together these different technologies that you might have gone to one tool to analyze what's in those documents. You might have had to go to another tool to be able to mark them up and make changes. It's now all happening on the platform.
Stepping back, when you look at like what's happened in the legal profession and the impact of AI over the last couple of years, is there something where you say like, 2.5 years ago when I saw this for the first time, like, here's what I predicted, and yeah, that absolutely has come to pass? And is there something where you're like, not that you got it wrong, but like where you've been like, I'm surprised. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we tested, and we had a whole test suite of ideas and applications that every kind of opportunity to leverage AI that came out that seemed like something new, we would try. And none of it really kind of stood up to the level of scrutiny that we had in NetDocuments. But when the first models of Gen AI became more publicly available, we started doing those classifications. So kind of going back to that AI profile. We firmly believe that as a document management system, being able to help users understand what was in their content was job one. And we saw that even these early models were quite effective at being able to understand the content for purposes of classification and data extraction. What we found, though, was that it was not ready to scale yet for the reasons that we talked about. The models were slow. They were not as accurate as they are today. They didn't have the context window size that they have today. So a lot of documents you were only taking in the first page or two or something like that. But we believe that those models were going to get there. And as I mentioned today, now they have, right?
Right.
And so we are there. So I think that was one of the ones.
I mean, you sort of had to build on a little bit of like faith. Reasoned faith, but like in other words,
we saw it going.
Like,
for sure.
Okay, let's build because this is where it's going to be.
Yeah.
And so by the time it gets there, we'll have done all of that like prep work to get there.
100%.
Yeah. Right. Which is funny because I think a lot of, tech companies often, have to tell law firms, you kind of like have to get data ready. You have to like, prepare for what's coming. And you as a tech company, we're sort of doing that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think that was one space we felt really good about. I think the other space that we really tackled was that the agentic space, where we said we think that this is going to become a really important mechanism for us to be able to expose AI inside the platform and also to be able to interact with content in these new and interesting ways. And so we invested heavily in our Agentic Architecture. And I think that was different from how you started seeing some chatbots initially emerge, where it was, I think a very straightforward implementation. What we were able to do was take, a really strong, agentic architecture model that now has access to tools like the editing tool I talked about before, like an extraction tool that we're making available this year, and also our search tool. So an assistant that knows how to search across NetDocuments to find content, make sure this is the right thing. Like you've asked a question.
Yeah, I made this point to Scott when we were talking yesterday.
Yeah.
Which is that it's like the AI itself, very, very similar to how a human being would process and output language, and it sort of thinks and reasons in that way. But what you've sort of done is not just say, okay, now there's a sort of like AI person here. It's like, no, we've now taught the AI person how to use NetDocuments, how to use those tools. And I think, to me, I think this is going to end up being like one of the most significant like advances in AI, when people realize that there's a lot of tools that we use both in the real and the digital world that mitigate against hallucination. Like the example I gave you yesterday was, if I go outside and I say, oh, it's pretty hot out here, I think it's like 73 degrees. Like no one does that today. You use like a thermometer, right? Which is a bunch of, connected digitally to your phone, so you can measure, so you can know, right? We often have those hunches. It feels like it's going to rain,
Right.
but we use tools to sort of like check ourselves. Like, oh, you think you're losing weight? Step on a scale, look in the mirror. We have these mechanisms as humans, and I think that the idea of like AI using the same set of tools that humans have used typically to like confirm, so like search the database, right? I think that to me seems like one of the big advances here.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is so great about it is the speed at which it can operate. So if you think about asking a question to our assistant and it being able to conduct not just one search, but dozens of searches,
Right.
in order to quickly then evaluate the content, fetch that document or set of documents and look for the answer inside of it, and then maybe make some adjustments and say, okay, I didn't find it here, I need to reach into the next one. That is how lawyers work. That is how people get work done today. And to be able to offload some of that really time consuming and frankly, not the most enjoyable part of the job,
Right.
to an assistant, to be able to say, hey, what I'm actually trying to find is who's on the board of directors of this company. And the way I might have done that before was essentially put together some keyword searches that I hope will land on a set of documents that will inform my answer. But with an assistant that has these search tools available to it, it can now iterate through all of those documents and build out not just the answer to the question, but even a timeline of what changes have happened with that board of directors, and be able to share that. And all of the answers are then cited and linked back to the content that it used inside of NetDocuments.
I mentioned on stage yesterday that there was this MIT study that came out, and then a Fortune.com headline that sort of mischaracterized the study. There's 95% of AI deployments, the enterprise, are failing. Well, if you look more deeply into the study, you found that's not actually the case. But what they were having trouble with, especially a lot of the AI personal assistants, was measuring ROI.
That's right.
So from your perspective, like, what is the ROI of AI and how should people think about that?
Yeah, so on the application side, in terms of workflow apps that people have built using AI, we've actually had some very clear case studies where people have been able to consolidate their tech onto our platform and be able to, essentially say, we don't need this tool and that tool and so forth. We've been able to build apps that replicate these different applications. And so in that case, it's very easy to build that ROI story and to be able to say, look, we actually have saved, 6 figures on our software spend by consolidating our AI onto NetDocuments. That's a pretty, kind of straightforward one. There are obviously some of the, scaled use cases of being able to do, certain work at, at scale that's repetitive, or that you feel confident in terms of the results, that then you can start giving fixed prices to your clients on. I think those are areas that are still in development. I think Nikki had a great line where she said there are kind of case studies and examples of that. We're still waiting to see like the entire market start to shift towards that, but you can find those as well. But I think some of the other areas where it is hard to measure, but we are hearing, quite readily about just the experience of having an assistant able to be there to help you. It's something that people value, that they don't have to go different places in order to use AI. They're able to have access to the latest models. They know it has the security of NetDocuments. And ultimately, it is one of those things where we're still working on ways that we can capture, what that value is. But attorney happiness matters. We for sure care a lot about the experience of our users, not just using AI, but just using the platform generally. And when people have those positive experiences, we want them to be effective. We want them focusing on client work. We want them focusing on delivering great service.
Yeah, and it's funny, talk about lawyer happiness. I think AI would have taken off no matter what, but I think part of the reason that AI took off as much when it did, and in particular within the legal profession, was that it came post-pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I think people have almost forgotten the loneliness and solitude of working alone during those years, and especially a lot of people who were working remote. And I think that what happened is when you work in like the whole experience of working in general in a law firm is very often one of solitude. The way that the practice floors are organized, everyone has their own office. This is not typically like an open workspace concept, and a lot of that has to do with privilege and confidentiality. You kind of have to have it that way.
Sure.
It also can be, a kind of lonely work experience because you might be up at the office 3 a.m. and no one else is around. And as once upon a time, you might have like walked down the hall and asked someone a question. That wasn't necessarily available for a period of time. And even in the sort of post-COVID world, people have not really returned to the office in the way you would have expected. And I think that part of what AI did was it relieved some of that loneliness. Is like, sometimes it's hard to think through an issue on your own, and you just want to be able to like soundboard it off of someone else. Someone asked me or like, how do you measure the ROI of AI? And I'm like, well, I do think of the ROI, but I just, from my perspective, like, I can't imagine working without it. Like, for me, it has made work a more enjoyable experience in every which way. And I think that that's something that like, it doesn't always show up clearly right away on a P&L, but it's really important.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's just been so important to help lawyers recognize how it can be, that assistant that can be there to bounce ideas off, to ask questions, to validate some of your ideas. And we're seeing that happen in our platform very clearly with the ramped use of the assistant. We're seeing lawyers returning week after week, day after day, starting to use the assistant, and that stickiness of the assistant as part of that workflow. Once they reach a certain level, then it just becomes built in. And it's getting to that point where you recognize that it is a way of kind of challenging your assumption. You can kind of in a trusting way, have it challenge your assumptions. You can have it, push on things like, what am I missing here? What's the thing? I actually did this on a contract that I was looking at. I basically said, what am I missing here? What are the things that I need to be thinking about that I haven't thought about before? Yeah. And, I could have asked that question to our general counsel or someone else, but it was great to be able to just in that moment, be able to ask our AI that question.
Yeah, and I love that example because you're asking it after you've done your part. I mean, right. A lot of times people will say like, they get frustrated because it doesn't just do their work for them. And I often say like, okay, but do your work and then ask the AI to like help you think about like what you might have missed in that example. And I think that's a very different paradigm. And I think once people kind of realize, oh yeah, like I should do my work, but like I should also have a tutor. I should also have an assistant. I should also have a coach, someone who can kind of help me work through this. I often think that one of the greatest examples, and I'm curious how this might work within the NetDocuments context, but I think often of my time as an associate and how difficult it was to be told to just go and learn something and in the middle of like an active deal and like put that into practice. And I remember like the first time as an example, the partner was telling me, check the disclosure schedule. I had like no idea what they were talking about. It was not easy to like find the answer to that. Today I think about like how much better I would have been trained had I been able to just ask an AI like, hey, partner is asking me to do this.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do? Like, are there precedent documents I should look at?
Right. I mean, I can give you my own example. When I was practicing, I would enter a case that may have been going on for some time. And, there's multiple parties in it. There have been 25 depositions done already. There's a bunch of names that I have no idea who they are or what their role was in the case. And what we're seeing now is people who are, they have all that content loaded in NetDocuments and they just ask the assistant, hey, here's these 25 depositions. Help me understand, give me a summary of who these people are. And then you can drill in, be like, okay, in this deposition, what did they say? And it's such a different experience and such a different opportunity than trying to get read in. And frankly, it's so hard to get read in that quickly. It's not very
it happens all the time because like lawyers leave, they go on vacation, they go on leave, they get seconded, and someone else has to just jump in and somehow have all of the context of the person who's been working on this for the last 6 months.
That's right. And so I say it's not even about billable time. It's about providing great client service. And you will not be able to replicate that 6 months of experience that lawyer had unless you can use a tool that can help you ramp up more quickly. And so I really have been excited about the customers who have been kind of using it for these different kinds of use cases and getting real value out of it.
I'll give you one thing that I did not predict because I like to flex on my correct predictions, but one thing I could not have guessed is that in-house clients, in-house legal would in many ways have an accelerated use of AI more than their outside counsel counterparts. I would have thought it would have been that the outside counsel, because they've usually got a bigger tech spend, it's bread and butter to what they do. I thought they would want to jump on it a little bit, first be investing more. I think one of the surprises that I've seen both in industry surveys and anecdotally is that actually in-house counsel are in some cases using AI significantly more than their law firms. So right now, I know that a huge portion of the, our discussion is focused on law firms. And a huge portion of your customer base are obviously law firms, but you guys serve corporate legal as well.
Right. Yeah.
Did you see that coming? Was that a surprise to you? And how are you seeing that play out now with corporate legal customers?
Yeah, I was talking to someone about that earlier this week, and we do have a number of large corporate customers who basically they run law departments inside their corporation, right? I mean, there's hundreds of lawyers. They're using NetDocuments just as a law firm might in order to track all the different matters that they have kind of going on. And I think to me it was definitely because of their cost metrics and the way that they are thinking about, kind of managing spend and the acceleration. They don't have that tension with the billable hour and reduced work and so forth. I think that made sense. What kind of hit me more directly was when someone I was talking to earlier this week said, a lot of times now we're on the phone, meaning the lawyer is on the phone with their client, and the client has already run their work product through Gen AI, and they're asking about questions or issues or why not this and that sort of thing. And it actually reminded me a bit of when WebMD became so popular, and people were showing up at their doctor and saying what about this and that sort of thing. And I think at the end of the day, it's ultimately it's the knowledge kind of growing and the access to capabilities that are growing. And ultimately, I think the law firms are recognizing that, this is going to be part of great client services delivery kind of going forward. And so that's why we're seeing, more ramping adoption here than any tech we've seen before.
I'm not going to give a vendor plug because I'm obviously, agnostic as a podcast person, but in general as a consultant. But I do want to give a conference plug. if folks have ever thought about coming to Inspire, and thought, well, I this is a conference to come to. And I'll just say I was sitting outside this morning watching the sunrise over the mountains in front of a fire pit. And I turned to a couple of other folks who had their NetDocuments inspired, conference tags on. I said, not too bad for a conference about document management. So I do encourage, if you've ever thought about coming to the conference before, I've now been at this is my second time at ND Inspire in the US. I'm going to be in London speaking at your conference in a couple of weeks. But folks should definitely consider coming out to this conference at least once.
Yeah.
Documents really knows how to throw a party.
Yeah, we're fortunate to have great folks like yourself and others who are in the industry and participating in the conversation. We also have, it's just a great way to learn more about what we're doing. And it's not just AI, it's actually across the spectrum. We spent a lot of time actually, today talking about, the things that we're doing in core document management with Microsoft and doing fun things like co-authoring and how we're doing co-authoring differently than how other folks are doing it, because we recognize the way lawyers work is special and different. And so it is a lot of fun conference. I'm excited. You're going to be in the UK. You'll see some of the team members there. I'm going to be in Australia where we have a conference as well. So it's going to be a busy couple of months.
Dan, thanks as always. Look forward to doing this next year.